Homeless artist gives Keanu Reeves a portrait. His response leaves everyone in tears. Where are you watching this video from? Please comment and let us know. Also, don't forget to like the video and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. The late afternoon sun cast golden hues over downtown Los Angeles, stretching long shadows across the pavement. The streets bustled with energy tourists snapping photos, business people weaving through the crowd, street vendors shouting their latest deals. Amid the chaos, a man sat quietly on the cold concrete, his back against the brick wall of a coffee shop. His name was David Mercer. Once, his paintings had graced the walls of galleries, his name spoken with reverence in the art world. Now, his only canvas was a battered sketchpad, his only audience the occasional passerby who glanced down before hurrying on. His fingers, smudged with graphite and charcoal, moved effortlessly over the page, bringing to life the contours of a young woman's face someone he had seen in the crowd minutes ago. The world had moved on without him, but David still had his art. As he worked, the hum of the city faded into the background. He didn't notice the man who stopped a few feet away, watching him, clad in a simple hoodie and dark sunglasses. He blended in with the crowd, just another pedestrian in a city that never paused long enough to care. But this man, unlike the others, lingered. David, sensing the presence, looked up. For a moment, he met the stranger's gaze, unaware that he was staring into the eyes of one of the most famous actors in the world. Keanu Reeves smiled slightly, then crouched down. "That's incredible," he said, nodding toward the sketch. David blinked, momentarily disoriented. He wasn't used to compliments anymore, let alone from someone who spoke with genuine admiration. He cleared his throat. "Just something to pass the time." Keanu studied the sketchpad, then looked at David. "You've got a gift." David shrugged. "Had a gift," he muttered, flipping to a blank page as if trying to erase the conversation. But Keanu didn't move. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He placed it gently beside David's sketchpad. "Talent like yours shouldn't go unnoticed," he said, his voice low but certain. "Don't give up on it." And just like that, he was gone, melting back into the river of people, leaving David staring at the bill and, for the first time in years, feeling something stir within him. David's fingers trembled slightly as he picked up his charcoal pencil. He had recognized Keanu the moment their eyes met, but shock had rooted him in place. It wasn't every day that a Hollywood legend crouched beside a homeless artist, let alone offered him words of encouragement. But instead of calling out, instead of chasing after him like so many others would, David did what he knew best. He sketched. His hand moved instinctively, the pencil gliding across the rough paper, tracing the lines of Keanu's face from memory, the gentle slope of his nose, the shadowed hollows beneath his cheekbones, the way his lips curled into that small, knowing smile. David poured every ounce of emotion into the portrait, capturing not just the man's features, but the quiet kindness in his expression. He barely noticed the world around him, the honking cars, the chatter of tourists, the distant wail of a siren. All that existed in that moment was the image forming on the page. And then, a shadow fell over his work. David looked up, his heart hammering in his chest. Keanu Reeves stood before him again, hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie, his head tilted slightly in curiosity. "You were sketching something earlier," Keanu said, his voice carrying over the city's noise. "Mind if I see?" David swallowed hard. He hesitated, suddenly hyper-aware of the imperfections in his hurried strokes, the uneven shading, the slight asymmetry in the eyes. Who was he to offer a portrait of a man who had the whole world at his feet? Yet, despite his doubts, he slowly turned the sketchpad around. "I hope it's okay," David murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not perfect, boo. Keanu took a step closer, his sunglasses slipping down just enough to reveal his eyes. He studied the portrait in silence. A few beats passed, and then he let out a soft chuckle. "This is incredible," he said, his tone filled with something David hadn't expected. Not just politeness but sincerity. David's face grew hot. He wasn't sure when he had last received genuine praise for his art. Keanu carefully took the sketch, running his fingers along the edges as if it was something fragile, something precious. "Would you let me keep this?" he asked. David blinked. You actually want it?" Keanu grinned. "Of course. You captured something here. More than just an image." He tapped the sketch lightly. "You've got real talent, my friend." For a moment, David forgot where he was. The weight of his circumstances. The cold pavement beneath him. The years of hardship, all of it faded beneath the warmth of those words. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he believed them. Keanu stared at the portrait, his fingers resting lightly on the edges of the paper. His expression shifted what had started, as curiosity deepened into something more. Silent awe. The street noise faded into a distant hum. David watched, his breath caught in his throat, as Keanu's eyes traced every line, every shadow, every carefully placed stroke. The intensity of the moment made David's palms dampen with nervous sweat. Had he done something wrong? Had he captured something too raw? Too personal? Then, Keanu exhaled a slow, measured breath, as if steadying himself. "This is incredible," he murmured, his voice barely above the city's constant motion. He wasn't just being polite. He wasn't saying it to be kind. He meant it. David felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent years convincing himself that his art no longer mattered, that whatever gift he once had been swallowed by the harsh realities of life. Yet here was Keanu Reeves, an icon, a man who had seen the best the world had to offer looking at his work, as if it was something sacred. Keanu lifted his head, his gaze meeting David's. There was something unspoken in his eyes. Something heavy. And then, before David could look away, he saw it, the glimmer of moisture gathering at the edges of Keanu's lashes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Keanu swallowed hard, blinking away the emotion that threatened to surface. "You have a gift," he said, his voice thick with something David couldn't quite name. A real gift. David's chest tightened. He had spent years being invisible, fading into the background of a world that had once celebrated him. And now, in the span of a few minutes, one man had reminded him that he was still here, that he still mattered. Keanu gently placed a hand over the portrait, as if absorbing its energy. Then he looked back at David, his expression filled with something rare, something genuine. "You deserve so much more than this," he said softly. David didn't know what to say, but for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. And that was enough. Keanu held the portrait with a kind of reverence, his fingers gripping the edges as if afraid it might slip away. Then, reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his wallet and took out several crisp $100 bills. Without hesitation, he extended them toward David. "For your work," Keanu said. "It's only fair." David glanced at the money, then at Keanu. The offer was tempting, more money than he'd seen in months, but something inside him resisted. He shook his head slowly, offering a small, almost embarrassed smile. "It was a gift," David said. "Art should be given, not sold." Keanu's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if taken aback. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. "That's rare," he murmured. David simply shrugged. But Keanu wasn't done. He crouched down again, leveling his gaze with David's. "Tell me," he said. "How did you end up here?" David hesitated. It had been years since anyone had really asked about his life. But there was something about Keanu's presence, his quiet sincerity, that made David believe he actually wanted to know. So, for the first time in a long time, David spoke. He told Keanu about his past, about the art world that had once embraced him, about the gallery shows, the critics who had praised him, the collectors who had paid small fortunes for his paintings. And then he spoke about the fall, the financial missteps, the betrayal by a business partner, the mounting debt, how everything had crumbled all at once, leaving him with nothing. "I lost my studio, my home, everything," David said, his voice quieter now. "I tried to rebuild, but doors started closing. My name became a cautionary tale." He exhaled sharply. "Eventually, I just stopped trying." Keanu listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When David finished, a silence hung between them. Then Keanu nodded, as if coming to a decision. "That's not how your story ends," he said. David let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah? And what's the alternative?" Keanu pulled out his phone. "We're about to find out." Before David could protest, Keanu snapped a photo of the portrait. Then one of David himself caught off guard. Charcoal smudges on his fingers, his sketch pad resting on his lap. Then Keanu started typing. David frowned. "What are you doing?" Keanu didn't look up. "Telling people about you." David's pulse quickened. He had spent years avoiding attention, retreating into the anonymity of the streets. But Keanu was already tapping the post button. A moment later, the notification sound chimed. Then another. And another. Keanu turned the phone so David could see. His post was already taking off. The caption read, "This is David. He's an artist, one of the best I've ever met. Life threw him some hard times, but his talent is undeniable. If you're in LA and need a masterpiece, find him. Let's get him back where he belongs." David stared at the screen, the likes and comments multiplying before his eyes. Messages flooded in, people asking where they could buy his work, gallery owners expressing interest, art lovers offering support. His hands shook. "I don't know what to say." Keanu placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Say yes," he said simply. And for the first time in years, David dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had a second chance. The days that followed felt like a dream. One moment, David was sketching on the cold streets of Los Angeles. And the next, his story had gone viral. Messages flooded in, people offering commissions, old collectors rediscovering his name, gallery owners suddenly interested in the man they had once ignored. But the real turning point came when Keanu reached out again, this time with an offer that nearly made David drop his sketch pad. "There's a gallery in town," Keanu had said over the phone. "A good one. They want to feature your work." David had nearly laughed. "I don't have a studio. I barely have supplies." "You will," Keanu assured him. "Leave that to me." Within days, David found himself inside a well-lit art studio, his own space, his own sanctuary. Anonymous donations had poured in after Keanu's post, enough to get him back on his feet. He worked tirelessly, pouring years of bottled-up emotion onto the canvas. The pain of losing everything, the loneliness of being unseen, the flicker of hope that one act of kindness had reignited. And then, the night came. The gallery opening was a blur of handshakes, flashing cameras and murmurs of admiration. People stood in front of his paintings, studying them with reverence. Critics who once dismissed him now whispered his name in tones of awe. David wasn't just back, he was reborn. As he stood at the front of the gallery, a microphone in hand, he scanned the crowd until his eyes found Keanu. Dressed simply as always, hands in his pockets, the actor gave him a small nod. David swallowed hard. "I don't know where to begin," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A few weeks ago, I thought I was invisible. I thought my story was over. He looked at Keanu, his throat tightening. But one person saw me. And because of that, I get to stand here today. Applause filled the room, but David barely heard it. He stepped down from the podium, walking straight to Keanu. Without hesitation, he pulled the actor into a tight embrace. "You didn't just give me a second chance," David whispered. "You reminded me why art matters." Keanu hugged him back, his voice quiet but steady. "And you reminded me why kindness does." As the night went on, David watched people admiring his work, discussing his pieces with the same passion they once had. He felt whole again. Somewhere in the back of the room, Keanu simply smiled, knowing that this moment was the real masterpiece.